Hello everyone, I'm Sarah Taylor from LSE Life, and in this presentation I'm going to talk you through the fundamentals of planning and designing your policy paper or dissertation. The plan for this session is as follows. I'm going to start by talking about how to focus and formulate your research question. So we'll start by talking about narrowing down, which is the process of choosing a topic and then narrowing it down until you have your research question. And then I'll talk a bit about what an original contribution is and how independent your project should be. Then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about planning your whole research project. And then I'm going to focus on your research proposal, which is your first deadline. So we'll talk about what a research proposal is, and then a few tips for writing your proposal. And then I'll talk a little bit about your planning for your proposal. To choose your research question, you need to go through this process of narrowing down that's depicted in this diagram here. This looks very neat and tidy. It's usually much messier than this, but this captures the process quite clearly. So what you want to start with is a topic area that you're interested in. And usually this topic will have come out of your reading. Something will have come out that you think is interesting and worth further research. And then through further reading, you'll choose an aspect of the topic area that you're particularly interested in. And then you want to generate as many possible questions as you can about that topic area that you want to know. And then from that list of possible questions, you're going to choose your research question or research questions. Let's have a look at an example of how this narrowing down might work in practice. So say from your reading, you developed an interest in the topic of risk. So you read a bit further about that topic, and then you decide that you want to know a bit more about how people perceive and deal with risk. The next step is to generate possible questions from your topic area. So for example, what risks are of greatest concern to people? Does this concern vary by age, gender, social class, education, etc.? Do parents perceive more risk than non-parents? And so on. So you should generate as many possible questions that you're interested in as possible, particularly things that you don't think are answered or are not answered very well in the literature. And then the final step is to choose the best research question or research questions from that list of questions. And again, that will be informed by your review of the literature. So you'll pick questions that you think need to be answered. For example, what risks are of greatest concern to people? Does this concern vary by age, gender, social class, or education? Now, as I said earlier, that lovely diagram looks very neat and tidy and very linear, but this process of choosing a research question is not linear. It is an iterative process. So you need to read as much as you can, and don't just read, also write down your ideas, write down summaries of the text that you're reading, and write questions as you go along. No matter how stupid you think the questions are, write them down. Then read and write some more, revise the questions that you've written, and keep repeating that whole process until you're satisfied with your research question. Now, you may not have thought about this, but talking about your ideas is also a really important part of your research process. You need to keep explaining your research to yourself and to other people, and to keep asking and answering critical questions about your research. The best way to do this is to try to organize study groups with fellow students who are going through the same process, so you know exactly the types of questions to ask each other. And another thing you can do is to make an appointment with an LSE Life study advisor and talk through your research with them. The kind of questions you want to ask other people about their research are critical, open-ended questions. So things like what is your topic? What is your focus as a starting point? Then why are you interested in this? Or how is it relevant to the field, to you, to the current climate or to a particular context or whatever it may be. The third key question is how, and this is how are you going to answer your question? How are you going to find out this missing knowledge? So this will be about your methodology and your research method. The fourth question is about your viability. Can you do this within the time that you've got available? Can you access the data that you need? And can you access the literature that you need for this piece of research? And then related to that might be any potential problems that might come up. And it's always a really good idea to try to anticipate problems before they happen. And the more you ask questions about other students' research, the better that student will do, and vice versa. Listening to other people talk about your research is really helpful in getting you to think about the weaknesses and the strengths of your own research. So listening to other people as well as getting them to ask you questions is a really useful thing to do. A policy paper or dissertation should make an original contribution to your field. But what does that mean? Essentially, making an original contribution is adding something to the field of knowledge. And usually reading is the most important thing here in terms of reviewing the existing literature and finding what's often called a gap or an inconsistency or a problem in the existing knowledge. It's really important to think about the time that you have and the scope of your study. So don't be too ambitious. You're not expected to cure cancer. You just don't have the time or the word count space. So examples of what you might do include choosing something that's received a lot of attention in the literature, but looking at it from a new perspective. So you might look at it in a different context, say a different country, a different area, in a different time period, looking at something using a different theoretical perspective, trying to explain something in a different way, or evaluating or assessing something in a different way. So there's lots of ways to look at things from a new perspective. You might also explore a policy issue that you think needs further exploration. And I would argue that it's probably impossible to find anything in the literature that doesn't need further exploration. We always want to keep expanding our knowledge on things. Another possibility is to synthesize previous studies or theories and then add your perspective on those studies or theories. But the key thing here in terms of an original contribution is expressing your voice and exhibiting independent thinking. I've just said you need to show independent thinking, but how independent exactly are you expected to be? Research projects can be a bit confusing because some elements are quite prescriptive, some things you have to do, and some are quite free. So you're definitely expected to work on your own, but there is support available. And the advantage of this independence is that there is a lot of freedom to do exactly what you want to do. The key thing is to read your guide very carefully and make sure that you're clear about the things that you do have to do. So examples of some prescriptive aspects are as follows. Your dissertation, if you're doing a dissertation, needs to have a literature review chapter. If you're choosing the policy paper option, that needs to make recommendations. That's an important aspect of a policy paper. Your word count is prescriptive. You cannot exceed your word count. And then there are certain basic elements that you need to include. You wouldn't necessarily have the same structure headings, but you do need to have the main sort of components within your study. So which aspects are free and independent? First and foremost, this is your research, so you need to show independent thinking and originality. You need to think very carefully about what you want to do and how you're going to do it. And planning is a very important part of this. So you need to set your own interim deadlines before your final hand-in dates, and you need to stick to those deadlines. It's really important to manage your time carefully. It's also very important to note that your mentors are there to guide you, not to prescribe what you should be doing. So don't expect them to tell you what to research or how to research it in detail. Use them to bounce ideas off and to ask for guidance, but it's not their role to tell you what to do. Now, you might be tempted to put everything off until Easter break because you will be quite busy with your other work, but don't do this. It's a very risky strategy and it doesn't allow for contingency time if things go wrong. So try to make time every week just to do a little bit of your project as you keep going along. In week 4 of Lent term, you will be submitting a progress report. This should be very helpful in keeping you on task and helping you to check your progress, and also to figure out how much more you need to do, and also whether you might need to change direction with your project or revert to your plan B, which hopefully you thought of at the beginning of this process. Now let's have a look at some important considerations when planning your research project. The first step in effective planning is to consider your limitations, the limitations around your project. So the first most obvious limitation is your submission deadline, the date when you have to hand your research project in. So the first key question to ask yourself is, can I do this project by this date? And then how can I do that? So you need to think about how much work you can do every week, how long certain tasks are going to take. And also remember that most of those tasks will probably take longer than you expect, especially if you haven't done a research project before and this is all quite new. The second thing to consider is the scope of your project in terms of word count. So 6,000 or 10,000 words might sound like quite a lot, but it really isn't very much at all in terms of presenting a full research project. So it's quite important not to be overly ambitious in terms of how much you can do within that word count. A very good tip is to look at examples of other policy papers or dissertations from previous years and get an idea of what can be achieved within that word count. Third key part of planning is to try to anticipate problems that might arise. And this will help you to allocate the time that you need to allocate to each task. So what kind of challenges might come up? There might be risks you have to face, permissions in terms of accessing people or accessing data. You may have to get ethical clearance if you're dealing with human subjects. You might have difficulty finding the literature that you need. It might be in certain archives and so on. So try to anticipate those in advance so they don't hit you by surprise. And then related to the risks and the challenges, always have a plan B. So if the first plan doesn't work out, you've got something you can fall back on. That you can use, particularly after your progress review in Lent term, you may find that you do need to revert to your plan B. And finally, make sure that you start planning your time now. So think about your time and how you're going to plan it from now until your due date. So once you've figured out the limitations of what you can do in your research, and once you've decided what you're going to research and how you're going to research it, you need to set your milestones. Milestones are interim deadlines that you set along your research journey. And these are deadlines for tasks that you need to complete in order to finish your whole project in time for your final deadline. So those might be tasks like writing your literature review, finishing your data collection, and so on and so forth. It's really important to set these milestones and to stick to them if you want to finish your project on time. Once you set your milestones, make a weekly plan. And this is a plan of everything that you need to do each week in order to achieve those milestones that you've set. It's really important to stick to your plan. Don't panic if things go wrong. If things go wrong one week, you can adjust your plan for the following week and just make sure that you stick to it that week. If you find that you're constantly failing to stick to your weekly plan, this might be because you're over planning, so you're trying to achieve too much within 1 week. If that's the case, reduce the tasks that you're assigning yourself and see if that makes a difference. Another common problem for failing to stick to a plan is procrastination. Most of us suffer from procrastination at some time or another, and it's mostly down to fear of failure, fear of not being able to do something. Procrastination is really much easier to tackle if you talk to people about it. So do talk to your mentor if you're having procrastination issues, or talk to an LSE Life Study advisors. They're quite good at giving strategies for dealing with procrastination. Another really useful thing to do is talk to your classmates about your research, even if it's a big whinge fest and you just say, oh, I don't know what I'm doing and it's nothing's working out. It's often a very good motivator, just in terms of hearing other people are having similar problems. They might give you solutions, suggestions to help you with your problems. Also, talking about your research gets you excited about it again, gets you interested in it again. And those are all really great procrastination busters. So if you're suffering from procrastination, don't suffer alone. Talk to people and try to break through with it. Another very important part of your planning is to always include contingency time. So this is extra time for when things go wrong. Remember that things almost always take longer than you expected. And also remember Murphy's Law, if anything can go wrong, it will. So make sure you include your contingency time in your plan. Another thing to remember is that it's not finished till it's finished. I know this sounds a bit weird, but what I mean by that is you need to keep revisiting different parts of your research. This research process is very iterative. It's not linear. You don't do this bit and then do this bit and then do this bit and then you're finished. You're constantly revisiting different parts, rewriting them, rethinking them. So make sure that's part of your planning process. And related to that is this last point, that reading and writing are a necessary part of your whole research process, but also refining your research question. So make sure you're starting to do lots of reading and writing now, especially the writing. Everything you read, write something about it, summarize it, write comments on it, write ideas that came out of it, any thoughts that you have, write them down. All of these are so important in terms of your thinking. It helps you to think about what you're doing, and also just having a record of all of those things which can all contribute to your final written project. Your first key deadline in this process is your research proposal. So let's have a look at what that is and how to write it. So what is it? A research proposal is a concise description of what you plan to do in your research project. The most important components being the so-called gap, in other words, the knowledge that you want to add to the field, and also the feasibility of your project. Can you do it, and can you do it in the time available? In that sense, your research proposal is also an exploratory guide for you. It helps you to pin down exactly what you want to find out and how you're going to find it out. It's also a very useful feedback tool for your supervisor. So if you explain your plans very clearly in your proposal, your supervisor will be able to give you effective feedback on how well this might work or how you might improve your research plan. A research proposal is also a great way to force you to think about your project and make decisions and to stop procrastinating. But please also remember this proposal is not a permanent contract, it's a proposal. It's very likely that you will make some changes to your research plan along the way. And of course, your proposal is a chance to try out what you plan to do, get feedback, and then make changes if it doesn't look like those plans are going to work. In terms of writing your proposal, it's like an academic essay in terms of style. So in other words, it's got an introduction and a body and a conclusion. But it does have specific components and questions that you need to answer. And these are usually indicated by headings in the proposal. The length of your proposal is important. This is a short document, so you need to focus on being as precise and concise as you can be. The policy paper proposal is a formative task, so that means you won't receive a grade for it. But a good proposal will obviously be the first step on the road to an excellent policy paper. So it's important to put as much effort into it as you can. The dissertation proposal is graded. It's worth 10% of the mark. And again, a strong proposal will be very valuable as a first step towards producing a great dissertation. And finally, don't forget to consult your guide to writing policy papers and dissertations. This document is on your Moodle page. It contains lots of detail about administrative detail, things about structure, and things about the textual aspects of your writings. So do make sure you consult that document. So you need to start planning your research proposal now. So during Michaelmas term, you want to plan and execute your proposal. And the point of this is to force you to set your research question and justify your research question. Also to define the sources you're going to use and the methodology you're going to use so that you will be ready to hit the ground running in Lent term and get started on your research. As I said, make sure you look at those guidelines on your Moodle page so you know what to include in your proposal, and make a note of what you might write in each section. So just write down some ideas during the planning stage. And then you can put some milestones in your weekly planner for what you need to complete along the way in order to hand in your research proposal on time. So things like finding the sources, doing the reading, deciding on the research questions, and so on and so forth. So start making a plan now and putting in those milestones that you need to complete. You also want to start writing now. A good way of doing this is to set up a document with the main headings of your proposal, the main things you need to include. And then as you're going, keep writing ideas under your headings, maybe summaries from readings, ideas for research questions, and so on and so forth, and keep them in that format, in that place. Keep adding to this document. If you do decide to change direction, save the old documents so you've got them if you decide to revert to a previous idea. But the key thing is to keep writing, to start writing now, and to keep writing until you've got your research proposal finalized. A final really important point to note is that doing a research project is a very messy business. Usually your ideas will be untidy, they will be disjointed, they will be spontaneous and repetitive. This is all absolutely normal, and you need to learn to embrace the mess. When you do come to writing up at the end of the process, you do need to have a more linear structure so that your reader can make sense of it. But you will find that things are quite chaotic for quite a long time through this research process. So don't worry about it too much. It does usually come together in the end, and it does need to come together in a coherent way for your reader at the end, but it's perfectly normal for it to be quite chaotic throughout the process. And a final note on further support for this process. The first most important thing is to consult the SPP Policy Papers and Dissertations Moodle page, which has a wealth of resources on it. There are tailored lectures, and there is also some targeted links to our materials on our LSE Life Moodle page. LSE Life can also offer you support in the form of one-to-one appointments with our LSE Life study advisors. They're really good at asking the right questions if you want to talk about your research proposal ideas, or at later stages of your research. You can go and bounce your ideas off them, and they're very good at giving you advice. Also check out our workshops. We do have some workshops running on writing a research proposal, so have a look at our website and see if there's anything that suits you. Lots of luck, and hope to see you during the year. Bye bye.